Welcome to another episode of High Output AI, where Elliot and Tom discuss all the tools and techniques that make AI happen.
Oh,
Ta-da. Yeah,
the noise with your mouth.
I got a bottle of wine upstairs, but I didn't crack it open for this. I'm still a bit sore from the old run this morning, and I figure I'm off to the land of Nod if I have a little drink with this episode.
As someone said to me, you'll be with big ears in no time.
Yeah, exactly.
Get that niche reference.
Yes, Australiana. Mate, how are you?
I am so good. I don't have a run to do after this, so I'm so much more relaxed than last recording. It was like on edge, being like, oh God, I got to go for the run. But I'm ready to go. I'm ready to talk AI. I'm so excited for this episode.
Yeah, I am keen as well. This is an interesting topic I've seen come up a few times. We picked it as the question for this week because I saw a post in Hacker News, and I just want to start by just reading this comment. It was a comment on a random AI story, but I think it really... Oh, no. Let me just get it up. Classic. Okay, so it was on a story from a leaked memo from Google that says basically, we have no moat, neither does OpenAI. Open source AI will be the future of all of this. To that, I strongly say we told you so. But this comment really stood out to me, and it's by a user called DAH Wolf. So if you happen to be listening...
It's Da Wolf.
The Wolf, if you happen to be listening, thank you for putting this comment out there because it really solidified a lot of the thinking I've had recently. So,
and we love a bit of group think around here.
100%. So let me read this to you. The current paradigm is that AI is the destination, a product that you go to interact with. That is not at all how the masses are going to interact with AI in the near future. It's going to be seamlessly integrated into everyday software, into Office, Google Docs, the operating system on your phone, your graphics editor like Photoshop, every major web platform, search, image search, YouTube, and all the like. Since Google and the other big tech firms continue to control these billion-user platforms, they have AI reach, even if they're temporarily behind in capability. They'll also find ways to integrate this where you don't have to directly pay for the capability, i.e. ads. OpenAI faces the existential risk, not Google. They'll catch up with what they have and reach a subsidy advantage. And it doesn't end there. This so-called competition from open source is going to be free labor and winning ideas ported into Google's product on short notice. Thanks, open source. So now a little bit of cheek there at the end around open source, but to summarize that into today's question, it is, will AI be a product like it is today with, say, ChatGPT, or is it going to be a feature of many, many products in the future? And I think this is a very interesting one to dive into.
Absolutely. And what this did for me as well is I've been toying this around in my head for a couple of weeks. I've had one of our communal notes pages ready to go on this, and I just hadn't really nailed it because it was part of the AI value chain. And one bit I was stuck on was what I called the consumer layer. And this just made it come clear to me as well. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of botch these two ideas together of is AI a product or a feature? And we're going to talk about the whole AI value chain. Because I think one thing we've talked about is that like AI is kind of nuanced. We say AI at the moment, everyone just thinks of OpenAI. They just think of Google. But there's a lot of different players that are involved, and there's going to be even more involved when we fast forward 10 years as well. So we're going to kind of mash these two together in some wonderful conversation today and explore this big question of, is AI a product or a feature? So, Elliot, do you want to start us off with kind of giving us an overview of this idea of what a product or a feature is, explained in current terms today?
Yeah, 100%. So much like that commenter on Hacker News, I think today, and when I say today, I mean like literally right now in the peak of this AI hype curve, AI itself is a product. You go and you interact with large language models like ChatGPT, with Midjourney, with all of these other tools pretty much directly. Yeah, look, there's an interface on top of them, but the distance between you and the AI is very, very small. And there is an investment thesis that these products will dominate the market and take over all of these other things. That's when AI is a product. That's when AI can probably charge $20 a month for a subscription. Now, the other side is the feature. That is, products that solve a very specific need may use AI in their workflow. Now, that's not the AI of yesteryear where it's basic recommendation models and everything else. This could be large language models, but it's built into Microsoft Word. This could be image generation and image modification, but it's built into Photoshop. And when AI is sitting there, I think there's going to be much more reluctance from the general consumer to pay $20 a month to access an additional feature. And providers are basically going to be racing to the bottom on price. And we're going to come back to the age-old thing where it's distribution wins, always, and platform providers make a fuck ton of money on the way through.
I think this isn't the best example to sum this up is using stability and stable diffusion. So stable diffusion, image generation, it's done fantastic. It's great. We love what they're doing there. Open source model. But everyone keeps talking about how this is the death of creators and the death of Photoshop, etc. But are people that currently using Photoshop going to switch to Stability AI's version of Photoshop that they're creating? Probably not. Photoshop's a fantastic, well-used product. Is Stability and Stable Diffusion more likely to end up as a feature of Photoshop? Definitely.
Yeah, man, 100%. And I think this goes doubly when you look at enterprise. I mean, how much enterprise software do we use all the time? It is just absolute dog shit in terms of design and flashiness, but it meets all of these weird esoteric enterprise level considerations that, you know, Stability is not going to suddenly go and do an LDAP server integration. They're just not going to. It doesn't make sense for them. And, you know, you can't throw out however many years of Photoshop's work on user experience just because there's a model that you can write a sentence to and it generates a picture. It's such a small piece of a much bigger product and pipeline.
Yeah. It is significantly easier to integrate AI into already distributed products, especially in the enterprise environment, than it is to build an entire new enterprise platform. That doesn't mean that that won't happen. There will be new enterprise software come out. For example, look what happened with Slack. Chat was there and it's been there for a long time. Slack came along and they won on UX. Obviously, they're now running up against the big competitor, Microsoft, and that's a whole discussion in itself, but and kind of what happens at the end of the market. But this is what's going to happen in general, that it's going to be integrate into the enterprise software rather than create enterprise software around it. But that doesn't mean there won't be new enterprise software created.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. There are going to be new products, new tools built that are primarily interactions with these, but I think there's going to be more to them than just a flashy AI model. People are going to have those same high expectations. And, you know, quite frankly, a lot of what we're seeing right now is flashy demos. It's, I can generate a cool poem or a song by typing to ChatGPT, or I can generate an image, but I'm really yet to see these things be put to the test in an actual day-to-day, you know, brownfield project. Not everybody gets to start from, oh, I need a new song or I need a new chapter or a blog post. It's like, all right, here is 40,000 pages of documentation that already exists for the company. Can you slowly work through this and try and make it better without starting again from day one?
Yeah.
And I've not seen that succeed just yet.
So let's you initially gave the example of OpenAI. Let's bring it back to Hacker News. Dar Wolf gave the example of OpenAI and Google. Now, how do you see that playing out for these two different but working in the similar space companies?
So if I had to place bets, I would say Google is going to come out on top here. I think the other thing we've seen that needs to be mentioned here is that running an AI service is an expensive endeavor. GPU time is not cheap, and you know, you really need a compelling reason to be using AI in your product or your, you know, or as a product even. And when novelties start to wear off around this stuff, and especially when there's competition, that's going to drive prices down. And if I had to bet who has a better chance of succeeding and continuing to run this potentially as a loss leader, I'd bet on Google any day of the week. I think from OpenAI's perspective, Microsoft might come in and sweep them up and make them a Microsoft team. But on their own, I just think it's going to be next to impossible for them to keep fighting this fight.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to, and we'll get to it in a bit, at this big model layer, at this, I won't say foundation model, but where there are foundation models involved in it, but this layer where there's massive models, right? It's going to be very hard to earn money there and stay alive as a business, because you're going to be competing not only with open source, but you're going to be competing with large companies that are willing to give it away for free, as you said, a loss leader, and make money elsewhere. And this is Google's business model. They give you fantastic tools. They give you Gmail. They give you Google Maps. They give you search, and they give you that all for free. Why? So you go look at more ads on YouTube or in your inbox.
Yeah, 100%.
And you mentioned it as well. Obviously, OpenAI has an ace in the hole, which is Microsoft, which is a very big investor. But if we consider OpenAI as a separate entity to Microsoft, which they are, life might be a little bit tough for them.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, who knows what Microsoft's been thinking during their time. It certainly makes their investment, which must be spent on Azure, a very smart one, because then even if the price crashes, they get a cheap acquisition and the revenue flows back into them. But yeah, we'll see where that goes. I don't want to dive too much into, is OpenAI doomed? They've probably got a few legs underneath them.
No, they're not doomed as well. Like, do we see challenge with their current model? Yes. Are they doomed? Probably not. They're very well funded. They produce great AI at the end of the day, and they have a very, very smart leadership team. I'm not sitting here thinking I'm smarter than Sam Altman, that's for sure. Do we see challenges ahead? Yeah, absolutely. But
yep, for sure. For sure. Now tell me, I can see in the notes here you put a pretty extensive work through together on what you've called the AI value chain.
So this has been something I've been thinking about a lot, both in the current state and the future state. And I've just called it the AI value chain, which is like, how do we get from, if we think about, making a widget, the equivalent of that, how do we get from stuff out of the ground through to product in people's hands? How does that look for AI? And I kind of came up with 5 steps in this value chain. And I want to spend time on the lower end of it, so the one that's closer to the consumer rather than further away from it, and tie it back to what we just talked about with this idea that things will become features and given away for free rather than a product in itself. So the first layer is the hardware layer. So these are the chips. We've got the GPUs. Mm-hmm. The second layer is the infrastructure layer. So these are the people that own the chips and provide access to them. The third is what I've called the massive model layer. So these are the big, both foundation models and other massive models that other AI is built on top of. The next layer is what I've called the application model layer. And then the final layer is the consumer layer. So there's 5 steps there. And I'm just going to quickly get into the idea of the first 2, because they're pretty simple, and I don't think too many people will disagree with me on that. So as I said, the hardware layer, these are the chips manufacturers. These are the NVIDIAs, the AMDs of the world, and I think we'll see a few more pop up in the space for a couple of different reasons, such as one is the Critical Technologies Act, and then the second reason as well is there's so much focus on the space, and there's so much interest in the space that we'll probably see some breakthrough technologies come out of here in the next few years, and with that, new companies. The infrastructure layer are the people who own the chips and provide access to it. So that's the AWSs, the Azures, the Google Clouds of the world. Their business is owning this stuff and giving it to you, and kind of just charging a fee for that ability. They're kind of almost like they own the power lines equivalent.
So, I mean, on this, just to make sure we're on the same page, if you had a provider that, let's say they ran an AI platform, not model specific, but hey, give us your model, we'll run it. And underneath that, it might be AWS or Google Cloud. Are you putting them in this layer as well?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. They're in the one above, which is the massive model layer or the application model. So at the moment, we actually have no AI. There has been zero AI made when we're at. So this is just AWS, and they go, hey, we have GPUs available for whoever wants them. That's where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
The next layer are the core and the foundation models. So these are the GPTs. These are the stable diffusions. They're the llamas, OpenAI, Meta, Anthropic. They play at this space. They're building big, friggin' massive models. Obviously, there's an overlap between the infrastructure layer and the massive models. So Google creates massive models, but they also own some of the infrastructure as well. But we'll just, someone like Anthropic who doesn't own GPUs doesn't play in the infrastructure layer. Does that answer your question from before?
Yeah. And I think there's probably a bunch that blur these lines. Right?
Yeah. This is all a spectrum. Yes. There's going to be people that break. There's going to be rules broken every single one of them.
Yeah.
Okay. And we'll jump into like why I think some companies will be successful, what will make them successful on each of these layers. The next layer I've put on top of this is the application model. And I think it's important to distinguish this between the massive models. And the reason is that at the application model, at the end of the day, you have created AI, but I don't think AI is your complete secret sauce. I don't think it's your sole reason to exist. I'd say this layer plays both. This is probably the most gray area where it plays into the massive model and into the consumer layer, which we'll talk about next. They're having some aspects of both. But it would generally mean that you have created some AI, but it's not a massive model that's like impactful in the way that an LLM is, or you've fine-tuned on top of one of these massive models in some way. And generally you have some consumer interaction. And I think these would mainly be very vertically specific, generally B2B businesses. So I think Harvey AI, Jasper AI, and Zapier are kind of good examples of these companies where they have AI, but it's not as massive as something like GPT-4 or Llama is. Now, the next layer, and this is what our friend from Hacker News helped me like get my head around, is like called the consumer layer. And this is like the layer that's absolutely focused in putting AI capability in front of individuals and making it part of everyday life. Think like Siri, right? Think like having your own personal assistant. There's going to be a number, and I think what's funny about this is that there's going to be heaps and heaps of application model companies out there. There's going to be heaps of Harvey AIs. There's going to be heaps of Jaspers. But I think when we go one layer deeper towards the consumer, well, there's going to be actually not that many. Because I think we're in the world where they're going to be giving these away for free because it's almost commoditized AI. Personal assistant AIs are going to be a dime a dozen in a couple of years. We're already seeing new search engines popping up left, right, and center, such as Perplexity and things like that. And at the end of the day, it's going to come down to like whether you use a Pixel or an iPhone or whether you use Windows or Mac. And there'll be things that determine that preference for you. But I think this is where big tech is going to be like really battling it out at this layer. And so they're kind of almost going to be like, big tech's going to be in the massive model layer and they're going to be in the consumer layer. And it's going to be things like giving away AI free to the consumer. So those are kind of the 5 layers. And I think the dynamics of this chain is that it kind of is like a little bonbon, right? Like it's really thin in terms of number of players at the top end. There's not going to be that many NVIDIAs or AMDs because it's just so expensive to do and you need massive scale. There's going to be a few more infrastructure players, so the curve gets a little bit fatter. And then we're going to get to this like massive model and application. There's going to be more at the massive model level, especially as open source projects come out. And then we're going to get to the application model layer, and it's going to be massive. There's going to be thousands of these companies. We've like every week there's 10 that are raising money at the moment at this application level. And then when we come back to this consumer layer, so we're at this give it away for free, make AI a feature. It's going to be small once again. It's going to like thin out. So it's almost like this like bonbon-esque.
That's interesting. I mean, do you think this value chain includes all the cases where AI is there, but it's not like it kind of just blurs into the background eventually? You know, like you use some stuff and it's got AI in it and you just don't think about the fact that it's AI in it. Like, I don't know, Spotify makes you a playlist and there's probably some really advanced AI doing that, but you don't think, oh yeah, AI playlist. You're like, Yep, cool playlist.
Yeah. And I was trying to think about this as well. Where do the companies fit where they have AI in the back end, but you don't actually friggin' see it? Like, where does YouTube fit on? If you take YouTube out of Google, right? They've got AI. They've got AI working on the algorithm that suggests you content. They've got AI working on how to best deliver. Where do they fit on this? And I think they're kind of in this like application consumery world almost, but yeah, I'm not sure exactly where these like fade into the distance AI is, but my feeling is that it's going to be there's ones where you don't see AI is probably going to be more at they're going to fit more in the consumer because they're essentially giving AI for free and it's making it making it a product feature, not making it the product.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, when AI is not front and center and when there's business models that involve giving away AI for free, that to me puts massive downward price pressure on everybody below this consumer layer in the value chain.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I thought what we could jump into here is that like kind of how I see these different layers, especially the bottom end, so the massive models, the applications and the consumer, and like what are the kind of dynamics going to play out there? Hardware I've already mentioned, which is like, it's like the competitive advantage in this space is just scale. So like Nvidia and AMD, like they've got massive scale already. So it'll come down to like cost per dollar of compute. Like there'll be some personal preferences around the edge. Like if you're a gamer and you really want to use X or Y, whatever it is. But like at the end of the day, if you're at AWS, you're gonna be like, well, actually not AWS because they're making their own silicon. But if you're like purchasing GPUs, it's going to come down to dollar per compute. And I actually think what's going to be interesting here is some of these players moving up to making their own chips, like we're starting to see, like Apple to some extent and AWS, and Google. So that'll be interesting to watch that space.
I remember a long time ago reading this article about sort of populations, economics, and space travel, and how there are certain sort of combinations of GDP and population density that mean that building a rocket makes sense. Do you think that in a similar way, but obviously with a smaller individual fixed cost, the hype cycle as it is with AI is allowing these things to exist at this high price point, but as we continue, people will sort of the sheen will wear off, and it may be possible that some of these AI offerings, especially at this massive model layer, they just don't make sense as a business when the price drops below a certain amount, because I think compute and building hardware has some pretty laws of physics-esque constraints, and consumer level has price elasticity of consumers. In the middle, you kind of need those two things to balance out to run a feasible business.
Yeah, that's interesting to think is like when AI is such a feature in all products and the value of AI gets reduced to essentially zero, and people are no longer willing to pay $20 a month to access a probability generator on words, things like ChatGPT won't exist probably.
Yeah.
And wait, was that at certain GDPs countries end up building rockets? Was that kind of it? Like at certain GDP,
it was sort of, and this was a long time ago.
We're so rich we can build a rocket.
Yeah. You need sort of a certain level of GDP, general economic prosperity, and interest in space travel to all come together to have, in this case, it was well before SpaceX. So we're talking about government-funded space programs.
Yeah.
If you look to large parts of Europe or really anywhere in the world right now, because there's a lot going on economically, if part of the Australian budget that's due out soon was we're going to build rockets for X billion dollars, people would probably riot in the streets.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, who am I kidding? It's Australia. They would riot on Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They'd be mildly disgruntled in person.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it would be interesting. I'd like to now see, like, when did China and India decide to have a space program?
Yeah. Yeah, and I just wonder if there is something similar. Obviously, this isn't at the sovereign level and it's not government funded, but, this balancing point that we need to strike between
Yeah.
availability of compute as well. I mean, I think that's a slept on fact, is that like there just might not be enough GPUs to have
Mate,
a million massive model companies.
This was my red hot. This was one of our red hot takes, is like sovereign compute.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so we've got the hardware layer, and with the competitive advantage of scale there, AMD, NVIDIA doing pretty well. There's going to be some major tech breakthrough in somewhere, or like that's going to pop up, or like some niche chip manufacturer that has a very specific application. Like for who knows, like fucking Tesla might decide to like start manufacturing chips for all we know with what they're doing with Dojo. Yes. And they like to flex at how good at manufacturing they are, so they might do something like that. But there'll be a few pop up here and there. But at the end of the day, and there'll be people going back up the chain like AWS and Apple. But at the end of the day, it'll probably come down to cost per compute. Infrastructure layer, so which is our AWSs of the world and the Googles, and obviously all these things overlap. And AWS is part of Amazon, and they'll be playing in other parts of it. But we kind of already know who the players are and who they're going to be. It's going to be AWS. It's going to be Azure. It's going to be Google Cloud. I think there's going to be a few new companies that pop up around, like Snowflake did with cloud compute. Like it popped up out of nowhere and became a very valuable company because it solved a very, very specific problem that AWS and Google Cloud wasn't addressing. So that'll be interesting to see when there's like some very specific companies that pop up providing this. But at the end, once again, this is going to come down to like your ability to average your fixed costs over many, many, many customers, so scale, because this is a fixed cost business. Like, sure, there's a bit of variable cost in running of these things and stuff like that, but like the hardware is one of the biggest, and the building of the centers is one of the biggest costs of this. Then moving into the massive model layer, and I just really think that the secret sauce here is going to be scale. And by scale, I mean, do you have the capability to make something massive and do a massive investment? And that would be a massive investment in engineers, a massive investment in compute, and just basically, do you have enough resources to fund it? And there's two models to do that, which is the open source way, which will be free labor by a very, very dedicated group, or it's going to be by someone that might be like big tech, which has lots of money, lots of engineers, lots of compute available, and willing to invest. And I think if you're not in open source, the only thing that makes you going to be able to play in this massive model space and make GPT-4s equivalents and things like that is you invest a lot here. You might be able to make a little bit of money in the models through B2B contracts with people building on top, but really you're just going to basically be giving them away for free with the ability to make money somewhere else. And so I think these like, sure, I think there will not be that many players in the massive model, and there will be a lot of power in these companies, but it's not because their AI is so magical and so good. I think it's going to be because they just have so much money. It's going to be like airlines, where like buying a plane isn't that difficult, except for the fact that you need a fucking lot of money to do it. And so therefore there's not going to be that many. Like every time a third airline tries to pop up in Australia every 10 years, and it ends up going bankrupt because like there's just not enough money to share around for multiple companies.
Well, to be fair, there's not enough money really even to support two, as the last 5 years has shown us.
Yeah. So like they're going to be big and they're going to be powerful, but I don't think it's because like ChatGPT is so good. It's going to be because like OpenAI has a shit ton of money and a shit ton of engineers. And sure, they had a shit ton of capability when it was rare, but the capability is getting less rare.
Yep.
So that's a massive model label, and I think secret sauce is just like, do you have enough money in the bank to be able to build this? So the application model layer, which is going to be the stuff that we're touching, I think, and there's going to be, as we said, there's going to be like the actual like, hey, I'm buying this AI product like Harvey AI, and then there's going to be the like, hey, this is part of the feature of Adobe Photoshop, and I think the secret sauce here is just going to be proprietary or niche data. And when I say that, I also include the ability to label that correctly as well. Or it's going to be UX. And your data AI is just kind of AI and it just does the thing. It's like, or it's going to be distribution. And that is like Adobe goes in and goes, hey, we got Photoshop and we've now got our own we've now got our own generative AI, but really they just bought a license to DALL-E and hooked it up and integrated and bada bing, bada boom.
Yep.
That's it. And they've got the distribution. They've already got all the enterprise agreements. They've already got all the consumers on board. They've already got all the communities. And bang, it's in there. It's integrated. And I don't think that, like, this is where we're going to see the most AI, like, in the news and in our daily lives.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, like, there's going to be very few companies with an actual advantage here.
Yeah.
And those very few companies will be on the distribution side of it or the proprietary data. So, like, whether it's a medical database of something like a hospital decides to go, like, spin out a company and create something on that. Sure, some people are going to win on UX because they have a great new way to search or something like that. But, like...
Yeah, I think the other one that could win here is like weird regulatory capture. If you just take GPT-4, fork it, build a variant, get it approved as HIPAA compliant or whatever, and then, you know, put a couple extra zeros on the price tag, there's going to be businesses there just for that purpose.
Yeah, like self-driving car algorithms, right? Like, once again, where it's like just the friggin' pain to get something approved to do it is going to be so hard that there's only going to be a few out there.
Yeah.
And just on that note, I actually think Tesla is a really good example of this application that's playing across the entire spectrum. Like, they friggin' own GPUs at the entire day, and it's just a good it's just a good example to show that, like, companies play across the entire different parts of the spectrum.
Who else would you say? I like that idea. You know, I think, let's say Google.
Yeah.
Are they building hardware? Yes. Do they own infrastructure? Absolutely.
Yep.
Are they shipping massive models? Yep.
Yep.
Application models? Yep. Google Cloud. And consumer products? Probably. I mean, Android is packed with a bunch of AI tools.
Exactly.
It's,
yeah. So it's almost like big tech is going to win is kind of the TLDR of what I'm saying here. It's like open source and big tech.
Well, I do think that, you know, coming back to the inspiration for this episode, that the post being that Google admits that they have no moat.
No.
I think when you have no moat, it makes sense to play across the entire stack because you're hedging your bets.
Oh, and you also have to play where, like, the only advantage you have is scale. And, like, it's really, really difficult to get to that size to be there. Like, you know, like, take BHP, right? The biggest miner in the world. It's not like they have that much advantage, but, like they just managed to be able to buy the stuff and get it out of the ground the cheapest across a few different commodities. Yeah,
100%. And, you know, as you were talking here, I was thinking about, like, what could mess up this stack. And, you know, let's say suddenly GPUs, we had a breakthrough.
Yep.
And rather than having a warehouse full of GPUs, you could run a ChatGPT-4-esque model on your smartphone.
Exactly. It's a 10x change in something to disrupt this model. And that's either a 10x at the, like, some chip comes out that is just, like, throws all of AWS's investment in the bin. And, like, the chips that they just bought from NVIDIA are just worthless now. And, like, so, or it's something at the massive model layer, which means, like, oh, hey, I managed to create something that's, like, 6 times more powerful than GPT-4, but with 3 bits of data.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, it's got to be some, like, step change thing, which is like, oh shit.
Yeah.
And, like, it's almost like, you know, maybe, but it's going to be hard to say because, like, obviously Transformers have been instrumental in where we are today, but would if you created the next Transformer and you kept that proprietary, would that be enough?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true, you know, especially if you could use that to get... I don't know if we're going to get an unfair advantage in quality or whether people are going to care as much, but I think if you can use this to mess with another layer, let's say you're at the massive model layer and you can release a GPT-4 equivalent model with, you know, 1,000 times less parameters because of your new super efficient architecture, you save on infrastructure and you can sell your product for less.
Which just comes back to your point, which is what happens. What does that mean? It means you can give it away for free or like 1,000x less and therefore like attempt to like get some form of distribution. Yeah. And so this is where we come to the next layer, right? And I think actually, like, I know Google plays across the, like, the infrastructure, the massive model, the application, and this final layer, the consumer layer. But I actually think this big tech is going to play really at the massive model layer and the consumer layer, and they're kind of just going to ditch the application model layer. Well, not ditch it, but like play there less. And the reason is like, if we think about the consumer layer, which in my mind is making AI part of everyday life with the average human. And that is, it's the equivalent of giving search to everybody, right? And I think the reason why the massive model layer and the consumer layer go hand in hand is, as I said before, the secret sauce in massive model layer is, do you have enough money and the ability to invest in a massive model? Yes. Yep. Okay. And then the second thing with the consumer layer is, can you get AI in front of people for free with the ability to make money somewhere else? And Google is just so well set up for this, because this is their business model that I've already said. They're going to be able to leverage Gmail. They're going to be Docs, Android, whatever it is. They're going to be able to give you AI away for free, whether that's like the equivalent of the GPT-4 in Microsoft, whether that is like better searching with AI through YouTube, whether that is the Siri equivalent in Android, whatever that's called, Hey Google, or whatever it is. They are going to give you AI away for free. And those are just like integrating into current products. This isn't like thinking about the Google Home, the personal assistant, the things that they could create on top of this and give away for free. And what are they going to do? They're going to make money on ads. This is their business model. And they're going to have and they're like starting to get into the hardware space a little bit as well. So they're going to make money. They have the ability to make money elsewhere. So they can make zero money on the massive models, and they can make zero money on the consumer layer, and they can make money elsewhere.
Yeah. And I really think this is so important, and what gets missed a lot. You know, we look at, say, Perplexity as an alternative search engine.
Are you going to pay $10 a month for a new search engine?
No.
When I am not going to be able to tell the difference.
Yeah.
They might it's going to be so hard for them, for me and you, who know this space, to be able to tell the difference between their search engine and Google's.
Yeah, and that's it. And, you know, even if you or I, who maybe are a bit more tech aware and maybe a bit more privacy focused and would pay not to have all of our data sold to an advertising company, you know, we might pay $10 a month. Is my mum going to pay $10 a month? You know, people out there who just don't care about that sort of thing going to pay? No way.
I'm still trying to get my parents away from like writing down their passwords like on their phone.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this will be such a battle. And yeah, I think, you know, all of these models that have done really well because they have a free version. Yeah, you might be able to work freemium and get a few people paying for some reason for the extra features. But again, you know, if I think about almost everyone I know, myself included, if there was AI in Google search that after 10 AI searches said, we're just going to revert back to normal Google search unless you pay $10 a month, you best believe I'll just keep using normal Google search, because I'm yet to see a use case where it really matters that much that I would pay it. I got enough subscriptions.
So let's what I thought would be interesting here is, we've talked about Google a lot, is to run through this big tech and think about how they're going to be, how well set up they are at the consumer layer, okay, which is getting AI in front of the everyday person, giving it away for free and making money elsewhere. So I'm going to give you a few names, and you give me your thoughts. Don't cheat and look at my notes.
All right, deal.
Apple.
I think Apple to me is the biggest enigma in this space, in that they don't have a cloud platform. They're really only playing at, well, depends how wide we want these definitions, but they're really playing at like potentially application model layer and above.
Yep.
I think
we think.
Yeah.
This is the other thing, is we don't know, right? Like,
Look,
so
as of what you can pay Apple money for today, it's application model layer and above. You can get into the Apple ecosystem and use some of their tools, and then you can build consumer products. You can't pay Apple to, you know, run on their Apple cloud infrastructure, really. So I think if they're doing it for their own product sales, there's a lot of potential there. They've always been about sort of like seamless end-to-end builds on stuff. You know, your watch talks to your phone, talks to your laptop, talks to everything else. There's potential at the consumer layer. Yeah, I don't know where that's going to land. I'd roll the dice on them. Yeah.
I think they're pretty well set up. And if you think about Apple is like, you think Apple, you think good UX, right? Like pretty seamless, can buy a phone and give it to grandma, right? Like I think they're pretty in a good position to just keep that UX flywheel going. I don't think like Siri will get better and better, but I don't think we're going to see like them bring out a whole new AI product, but I think it's going to make their current features better. So like, you know, like I keep getting suggestions every day with photos and stuff like that. That's going to get better. There's going to be auto editing on photos. There's going to be, like pushing me more towards Apple Music and Apple TV and things like that. Like, so I think they're pretty well set up to like use AI to keep the UX flywheel spinning.
Yeah. Although, you know, a very real example of where they may be falling behind. I was at dinner with my mum the other day. My mum and my sister, and I have a dog and my sister has a dog, and my mum loves both our dogs and takes a lot of photos of them. And we were looking through Apple Photos because she was like, oh, I've got these pictures that I wanted to show you of your dog from years ago. And I was like, oh, Mum, just search dog.
Yeah.
It'll come up. And she searched dog, and it did in fact return a bunch of photos of dogs, but only my dog. And because that was the dog she was looking for, my mum was suddenly like, wow, this is awesome. And then we're like, cool, let's get some of my sister's dog. And we just could not find a combination of keywords that would show the other dog, despite being tons of photos in there.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was such an interesting thing where, like, you can get, you know, both myself and my mum were impressed, a little spellbound by how well that worked. And then it was instantly shattered because it was like, cool, that worked, but also it's now frustratingly difficult to, you know, get pictures of my sister's dog.
Yeah. So I think they're in a great spot to keep this UX thing going, but this is just to the whole point of this, which is AI is a feature, not a product for Apple. They're still going to sell more phones and watches.
100%. 100%. Even Siri, which is pretty much an AI assistant, is a feature.
Yeah. Microsoft.
I think they're pretty well set to compete with Google. They have hardware, they have infrastructure, massive models, application layer, consumer products.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think they're going to do really well because they're just going to keep bundling crap in like they did with Teams. Inferior product to Slack, but hey, it's now part of everyday life, and it's another reason why we can't get rid of Microsoft Office at work.
Yep.
Keep bundling it in, keep rising the prices, keep getting more of my data onto Azure. Like, they're in a great spot to just keep throwing at it. I think an interesting question will be for them is, are they better off just like rolling OpenAI into Microsoft or making it themselves, which is cheaper?
Yeah.
Which is more effective, sorry.
Yeah, very true. Very true. And I wonder if in the end, the way that OpenAI is set up will come back to bite OpenAI in terms of it's cheaper for Microsoft to let them die and do it themselves than to buy them out.
Or learn everything from OpenAI, then suddenly jack up and use up all those fake Azure credits / money.
Exactly. Amazon's an interesting one. I think everything up to consumer layer, they're very strong.
Yep.
Consumer layer, don't get me wrong, like Amazon.com and even Amazon Prime, like the Prime Video to a certain extent, quality products. Twitch, I guess, is another one that's sort of slept on, but they're really not doing a great job of running Twitch. Yeah, I think they sit down the bottom layers. I think if I had to bet on which cloud provider that sort of plays at the bottom of that stack, well, I guess I'm talking just so we're using the same terminology. To me, the bottom is like hardware and consumer is at the top. So if we're betting
just say
on
hardware layer.
Who's winning down near the hardware layer, I'd put Amazon above Google,
Yep.
whereas Google, I think, will win at the consumer layer more than Amazon will.
Yeah, I really couldn't think of what Amazon would be doing that I would see that I would see or notice. Like you notice the dog example with Apple, and I think that you'll notice a few things there where it's a feature. Whereas like I think Amazon will be a lot of, I'll call it back office AI. So like basically helping to reduce staff, or like, you know, basically like keep chipping away at that big fixed cost layer within Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
I also think though that they could do something completely dark horse, like with Amazon Studios start producing stuff that's like 30% AI generated or something, that like, you know, to help reduce, like help churn out content, things like that. So
yeah,
I don't know. I actually put Amazon more as a dark horse in my head than Apple, because they've also got Alexa and stuff like that, which is interesting. So they do have that like actual AI interface with human beings. Before we know it, like the little robo vacuum cleaner thing that they bought could just be like AI generated. Yeah. Anyway, I think Amazon, like, I think they're gonna, as you said, play up at the play at the hardware layer, the hardware and infrastructure layer, and they're going to be massive there. Especially, and I think they might be the first interesting ones to go out and like start building their own silicon. And the reason is they don't have hardware, and it's somewhere that the other guys aren't playing, and they've always wanted to have their own hardware. Same with Meta. Like they managed to do it with the Kindle, but they tried to release a tablet that failed miserably, blah, blah, blah. So I thought if they wanted to like own some physical stuff, they might actually go that way. But yeah. And moving on, Meta.
To me, Meta feels... Yeah, they're a weird one too. Like, sure, they have a bunch of products, but when we think about their products like Instagram and Facebook and WhatsApp, I don't think there's any AI features that would get me posting on Facebook again. On the other hand, like, they do own a lot of hardware and infrastructure. Like, they could end up moving more towards being a sort of provisional layer for other things. I don't know. I feel like Meta, I don't know, just feel like they're in a weird spot. Like the very fact that they're called Meta because Metaverse was hot like 2 years ago, and now they're all in on AI. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of smart people there, but they don't seem to be doing as well.
I think, I reckon Google or Microsoft will most likely end up as I'll say the winner. And my measure of winner is like, how valuable does the company end up becoming on the stock market from AI? I think Google and Microsoft will probably end up being one of the winners, but those two are competing hard. Google is also, I think, competing the most. It's competing directly with Microsoft, and it's also competing directly with Apple. And I know Apple's kind of competing with Microsoft, but they're more on they're not as much, because like Microsoft's bread and butter is like B2B enterprise software for offices. So I feel like Google is like suffering the most competitive pressure on both fronts. But I think Google and Microsoft could be the winner. But then again, I would put like dark horse Amazon could just like crush everyone without us knowing it. I think Apple will just play their own game. But I just didn't even consider Meta. I nearly forgot to put them on the list. That's how I feel about them. I think they're like really, they're going to struggle the most here, because the only AI solution that I can think that isn't back office is like something that makes us spend more time on our phone, and that's kind of like a trend that people don't want. There's a lot of AI applications that I see in a lot of these places that add value in a, like, I'll say, less controversial way than spending more time on social media, looking at I just called it TikToks, but, you know, looking at short form video and pictures.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And I think, you know, Netflix probably falls into a similar bucket. Like, think of traditional big tech. Like, yeah, they're huge. They got a great consumer layer. They're probably doing interesting stuff at most levels of the stack, but they're not going to be known for shipping products at the infrastructure layer.
The final point that I wanted to make on this, or like this consumer layer, is I think we're going to see so many companies started here and started in the application layer, and they just get absolutely crushed when big tech just makes it free. I think about like masks, right? Like Snapchat brought that out, right? Like someone probably developed that, and they probably bought that from someone, where like masks are, you know, masks for your little phone so you can have funny horns or whatever it is. Like if that's like, I couldn't think, if that's like a product someone makes, Someone just get like one of these companies will just give it away for free.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think a good example here is like Slack and Teams once again, which is like Slack was doing something, sold it. Slack just founders nailed it.
Yep.
Sold at the right time. Well, IPO'd at the right time, then sold again at the right time. But anyway, Slack, where it's like great product, great UX, Microsoft just gave it away for free, and it's like Salesforce is probably sitting there thinking, "Fuck, we overpaid."
Yeah. I mean, I think there's some moves Slack could make to be more like, Slack plus Notion plus like Confluency type team collaboration. But yeah, I totally agree. And I think this really nails what I think we both agree on, which is that it's going to be much easier to sell AI as a feature than AI as a product. I think the products that succeed at the consumer layer are not AI as a product. They're AI in amongst a really good product experience.
So this is the $1 million question. If you're sitting there as like a potential person that wanted to found a company in the AI space, do you just give up? What do you do? Do you give up, go home, go work for one of the big guys and just admit defeat?
No, I don't think so. I think the ability to get started definitely increases as you go from consumer down to hardware. To start a new hardware company, you'd need some sort of deep tech type foundational technology. Infrastructure, you could do it on a niche, I think. You could have like hospital grade security AI infrastructure play. I'm sure you could get away with that. Massive model layer, you need some money, but maybe you could get it done.
If you're in the middle of a PhD and you come across something great.
Yeah. Or you've got an exit before, or you just have some reason to compete. Application model layer, if you want to just glue stuff together and make an API out of it, it's a lot of groundwork, but it's definitely possible to get going.
Yeah.
And at the consumer layer, there's never been an easier time to slap stuff together.
Yep.
And I think, we experienced this when we were running Maxwell Plus for however many years. Everybody said, we both have Maxwell Plus shirts on today by mere coincidence. You can tell we both need to do laundry.
But also not a coincidence because the amount of Maxwell Plus shirts that we both still have.
Yeah. But like through our whole journey, everyone said, "Oh, Google will do this, and you'll just be done." They'll just build it. But the size of the problem that needs to exist for one of these other companies to try and compete with you needs to be pretty big. I mean, look at Linktree, for heaven's sake. Like, that's one of those companies where I'm like, man, they've done really well solving a problem that I look at and think this is the stupidest thing in the whole world.
Yep. And
but they've nailed it.
They're laughing all the way to the bank.
They absolutely are, and power to them, because they saw something that I didn't, which is this is a problem that a lot of people need, but is in a weird spot that no giant tech company is going to solve this problem because it's just not worth it. And then they got scale, and everybody used it, and then they're worth a lot of money.
Like Instagram or someone will buy them. Anyway.
Yeah.
And I think this is like we're talking a lot about like how it's going to be really hard money, blah 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 blah, like OpenAI to make it. Oh, how could I ever make it? But this also means that there's literally never been a better time to start a company in this space, in my opinion, because it is the focus, because there are people wanting to work in this space, because there is money wanting to flow to the space. This is ironically, even though we've been talking doom and gloom. And as you said, basically what you're saying is that like you have two things to your advantage. One is being able to be niche, and the second thing as well is, no, that's really it. No, there's only one thing, which is like you can go niche and you can focus on a problem that is a really big fucking problem for a small amount of people. Like I don't sit here every day going like, fuck, I wish I had a personal assistant. But like I'm going to have one within the next 3 years from Google or Apple.
Yep.
But there is like definite stuff at work where I'm sitting there going like, oh my God, can someone make an AI tool that will mean I don't have to do this anymore?
And and again, this is it. It's going to be a feature of a wider product experience. You're not going to go to ChatGPT and ask it about every little thing. Yeah. You want a flow, a UX, a wrapper around this that is designed for the actual problem at bay. 100%. I mean, 90% of these problems that are being solved by ChatGPT, someone could solve right now with a couple of Python scripts or even, a few Google searches, but that's super annoying. And the reason ChatGPT is good is because there's a nice UX. But
Yeah.
when we get really specific, that UX is not going to cut the mustard.
No, it is not. So
to challenge, this in the other direction with your fandangled investor hat on.
Yep.
If you're looking at deals, and there's probably millions of deals out there floating around at the minute. From your perspective, which of these layers would you most want to put money against?
the way that I think about it is like the further towards the hardware you go, the more science experimenting, it gets, the riskier it gets. But at the same time, if you back the next NVIDIA at the founding stages, you're going to return the fund easy. That's So there's that. There's that dynamic, right? Like where you would literally play at every end of the spectrum, but you're just sitting there with the risk and the reward. And like the risk to me comes down to like how likely are you able to nail what I think is the important features in each of these, which I kind of rattled off. So for example, at the application layer, I would be asking the questions of like, do you have some form of proprietary data in some niche space? Or do you have the UX, or do you have the distribution? It's unlikely to be the distribution if you're talking to me for investment. But like, if you have like some form of niche data and the capability to turn that into something, and I can sit there and go like, actually, you know what? Someone like Google's not going to turn around and do this tomorrow. Or like, oh, actually, you know what? Someone who doesn't know how to develop AI, who's an incumbent in this space, would like to purchase that in a few years' time. Absolutely. Like, in reality, like I'm probably going to see more application and more consumer layers come across my desk than I am hardware. But at the you would look at every end of the spectrum and just be juggling that risk reward.
That is a very
boring answer.
investor-esque answer.
Yeah.
Cheering from the sidelines for all layers in the stack.
Yeah.
No,
Just-
fair call.
Yeah.
Fair call. I mean, that is always the answer. I
Well,
think.
where would you putting your product hat on, putting your AI hat on? Where would you? I'm trying to say where would you go start something, or where would you? Yeah, where would you be interested to like throw 10 grand at a company at the angel stage?
Application model layer.
Yeah.
I think the chances of me stumbling across a hardware or infrastructure winner are pretty low, and them needing 10 grand for me is pretty low. I think that massive models is played out, and it's really going to be damn hard to compete. I think consumer layer, it's hard to make the right bet. There's too many of them. To me, the application model layer with a smart pitch of we're going to do this for healthcare or legal or finance and provide APIs for really boring shit that massive model people don't want to provide and consumer layers don't want to build themselves.
Yeah.
I reckon that's the ticket.
Yeah, and I even think and I know I'm not correcting you here because you probably mean this, you were being brief for our listeners, but I think it's like not even as niche as it's more niche than law. It's like we are here to get rid of conveyancing of properties during the purchasing process, and that is our AI, and that's where we're starting. And if we nail that, we'll build up a database, and we'll build up a well-labeled database at that we can then turn into whatever other legal aspects there are of buying a house or whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like there's a company in Australia this week that raised money, and they're like $7 million, and they basically just do online wills, and then they built a bunch of features around that as well.
Yep, absolutely.
They got like 200,000 customers, crushing it.
We'll
Good
plug
on 'em.
your pest and building report into an AI and pull out red flags. That's all we do.
Yep.
And we don't sell that as a direct-to-consumer product. We just sit in the middle so that conveyancing firms can charge an extra $50 for this dumb report. That's, I think, there's in the short to medium term, there's going to be a lot of money to be made right there.
Yeah. And I think like another summary of today as well is like we've been talking about like AI becoming a feature. I think what this means for people that are wanting to found a company and startups is that like B2B software became sexy 10 years ago, and it will remain sexy. Just building in some AI functionality will just probably be a good way to raise money at the moment.
Yep. 100%. The real value is going to come in the long tail and the long time horizon. Much like, look, anything that is actually valuable in Web3 is probably still 10 years away.
Yeah.
This AI bubble will burst, but there will be real value created throughout the process.
And my gosh, we're excited about that.
Hell yes.
Here I was, mate, thinking we didn't have 60 minutes worth of content, but I reckon I could keep going for another 60, but we'll call it there, I reckon.
We will. And thanks for listening up to this point. It's great to have you, dear listeners, and hopefully you found this interesting. And until roughly this time next week, I hope you're having a great time. Go out and start those businesses, put your money into those businesses, and keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, hit us up to be first users.
That's it. We will road test just about anything, but we do not promise to give everything a favorable review. So if you ask us to review something, you may hear us talk about how shit your product is on a podcast. So be forewarned. Anyway, ta-ta for now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode. If you're liking this content, make sure you subscribe and like so we keep on going. And if you have any questions, make sure you hit us up on Twitter, join our Discord, or leave them in the comments below. Thanks again.